and started to build submarines and other warships. So, all within just 2 years of coming to power, he had managed to establish all of these things. The Treaty of Versailles had limited Germany to an army of 100,000. To highlight this, the Nazis soon had 600,000 men in uniform. Highlight 1936 and highlight that German troops were sent into the Rhineland, which was the demilitarized zone west of the Rhine River. So you can see the Rhineland in the map on page 377. And that was supposed to remain demilitarized, but Hitler just marched in there, and the West and the League of Nations, again, did nothing. Highlight the Spanish Civil War, highlight 1936, highlight General Francisco Franco, and he was pretty socialist. Highlight the top of the second column. He fought to keep Spain from falling into the hands of the communist forces who fought on the other side. So he lined up a bit more with the fascists than with the communists. So although socialist himself, he was fighting against communist forces. He wasn't able to get help from the League of Nations, so Franco turned to Germany and Italy, his fascist pals. Franco was not a good guy, notwithstanding that he fought against communism. He was very brutal to his own people, and this was a vicious, bloody civil war. But highlight that Franco defeated the communist forces, and that he established a military government in 1939. So this was a military dictatorship. Like I said, very, very tough, very brutal on his people. And he combined it with militant Catholicism as well. So Catholicism was the state religion. If you were not Catholic, you could be arrested, you could even be killed under Franco's rule. And that lasted for several decades in Spain. Highlight formation of the Axis. Highlight 1936, Mussolini and Hitler organized the Rome-Berlin Axis. Highlight also that Germany became allies with Japan. So highlight Germany and Japan. Highlight their pact, the Anti-Comintern Pact. Know that for Germany and Japan. And this was established, highlight to oppose communism and the Soviet Union. And then highlight Japan tripartite treaty with Germany and Italy. And highlight that this formed the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo Axis. And that these three became known as the Axis powers. Highlight in Austria. Highlight the date, March 1938. Highlight that Hitler massed troops on the Austrian border. He forced the Chancellor of Austria out of office, forced him to resign, and then once he had, Hitler's troops marched into Vienna, the capital. Highlight that they seized Austria without a shot, and they established the Anschluss, or the forced union of Germany with Austria. And yet again, the Western powers and the League of Nations did absolutely nothing. Not a thing to stop him. Highlight in Czechoslovakia. One of the ideas promoted by the Treaty of Versailles had been self-determination of peoples. In other words, people of different ethnic groups, different countries, deciding how to rule themselves. One of these countries, highlighted it was comprised of Bohemia, Moravia, and Slovakia, became known as Czechoslovakia. You can see that country on our map there. And despite ethnic difficulties due to a German minority in, highlight this term on page 378, the Sudetenland. Sudetenland. Highlight that Czechoslovakia had become the most prosperous Eastern European country between 1918 and 1938. Highlight that the Czechs found themselves surrounded on three sides by the Germans after Hitler conquered Austria. And they had 3.5 million Sudeten Germans, many of them pro-Nazis. So they found themselves, as we would say, between a rock and a hard place. Highlight that the Czechs would not accept the dismemberment of their country and prepared to fight. So Hitler started demanding that they simply hand over the Sudetenland, and they refused. Highlight that British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was a leading voice for peace and conciliation. And then highlight the French Premier, Edouard Daladier, and highlight that the two of them flew to Germany in 1938 to confer with Hitler and Mussolini. Highlight that Hitler assured the world that the Sudetenland was his last territorial claim in Europe. That's what he said. Basically, what he said to them was, if you give me this piece of land, I'm done. This is the last piece of supposedly German land. I'll be happy with this. Germany's united, and we'll be all set. They foolishly believed him without even inviting the Czechoslovakian president to join them. They simply signed over the Sudetenland to Germany. So highlight that Chamberlain and Daladier agreed to Hitler's demands and signed the Munich Pact. And highlight that it gave the Sudetenland to Germany. And the Sudetenland, it was natural resources. Most of Czechoslovakia's factories for weapons were there. With the sign of a pen, the Nazis got all of that. And highlight that Chamberlain proclaimed peace for our time. Highlight peace for our time. There's a famous picture of him holding up a newspaper that has that headline on it, peace in our time. And it was a very, very false peace. So highlight the failure of appeasement. Highlight the bold term appeasement and its definition here. It's giving in to the demands of aggressor nations or taking no action when the aggressors attacked the weaker countries. And the truth is that evil prospers when good men do nothing. All that's required for an aggressive nation to win is for the good nations to just stand back and say, oh, well, we just want peace. We're not going to do anything. And that's exactly what happened here. But highlight this guy's name on the next column, Winston Churchill. He was called the Jeremiah of England because he was basically like a prophet. He was kind of like, he saw exactly what was happening and he predicted the war that was to come. And Jeremiah in the Bible, they threw him in a hole in the ground because the Israelites did not want to hear what he had to say. And that's kind of what they tried to do with Winston Churchill. They didn't want to listen to him. The British people liked to ignore him. But he predicted exactly what was going to happen, and he was ultimately right. So highlight, in March 1939, just 6 months after the Munich Conference, Hitler violated the pact by occupying the rest of Czechoslovakia. So, oh yes, his very last territorial claim. He wouldn't take anything more. 6 months later, he takes over the rest of the Czechs. Peace in our time. Highlight, in Albania, highlight that Mussolini seized Albania in 1939. Highlight, in Poland, highlight this term, the Siegfried Line. So Hitler was demanding territory in Poland. There was the city of Danzig. It's now called Gdansk in Polish. But they wanted it back. It had been assigned to Poland after World War I. Germany wanted it. So now they were building the Siegfried Line to oppose the French. Highlight this name here, Maginot Line. So basically what these were these two huge fortifications, like forts built along these huge cement walls, bunkers underneath them. And they wanted to be able to deal with Poland without French interference. Highlight the Nazi-Soviet pact with Joseph Stalin, August 1939. And this was a shock to really pretty much the entire world. They couldn't believe that the fascists and the communists, who bitterly hated each other, would sign this pact. It was really the deal with the devil here. Highlight that this was a secret agreement between the Germans and the Soviets to invade Poland and divide the land between them. On the next page, highlight the Nazi war machine moved into Poland on September 1st, 1939. That date is in bold. It's going to be extremely important to remember because it is the date that World War II officially began. Last thing to highlight that Britain declared war on Germany on September 3rd, 1939. World War II, which would ultimately last from 1939 to 1945, had begun. So last of the highlights there. Make sure that you thoroughly finish your reading and answer all of your questions there. And let me know if you guys have any questions. Have a great day.